Have you ever actually stopped and wondered what it truly means to live as a committed disciple in your everyday life? I mean, it's one thing to believe in a historical figure, right? Or to read ancient texts. But what does it really look like to take those deeply held beliefs completely off the page and apply them when you're just rolling out of bed on a normal, stressful morning?
Well, welcome to today's Explainer. I am so thrilled you're joining us because we are breaking down an absolutely fascinating theological framework today. We're going to be looking at a deep dive by Pastor Chris Myers into the biblical text of John chapter 21, specifically verses 15 through 19. It's this incredibly powerful narrative all about second chances, profound commitment, and really the true cost of following a calling.
Here is our roadmap for the Explainer today. First, we'll look at the context of John 21. Then, step 1, love Jesus. Next, step 2, glorify Jesus. After that, step 3, follow Jesus. And we'll wrap it all up with the Monday Morning Challenge.
Starting with part 1, the context of John 21, setting the scene. Okay, let's dive right into this. So John wrote his gospel roughly 60 years after Jesus died, around 90 to 95 AD. And he was intentionally curating these stories to help a heavily persecuted late 1st century audience essentially prepare for their own massive challenges.
Our specific story here actually picks up right after the resurrection. And what exactly was the Apostle Peter doing? Well, he had actually completely reverted back to his old life. He just went fishing. He and his crew were out on the water, and they miraculously caught this massive haul of exactly 153 fish. So they dragged this crazy boatload to the shore, and who do they find? The resurrected Jesus, and he's cooking breakfast. Jesus looks at Peter, points to that massive catch of fish, and asks him a very pointed question. Do you love me more than these? He wasn't just talking about the fish. He was asking if Peter loved him more than his comfortable, familiar, old way of life.
Now, what is really interesting here is the specific setting and the repetition. You see, Jesus doesn't just ask Peter this question once. He asks him 3 times. Why? Well, just a short time earlier, right before Jesus was crucified, Peter was warming himself by a charcoal fire and denied even knowing Jesus 3 separate times. So right here, Jesus has intentionally recreated the exact setting. Around another charcoal fire, in front of his peers, Jesus is giving Peter the chance to replace his 3 historical denials with 3 present affirmations. It's just a beautifully deliberate act of restoration. Which brings us to part 2. Step 1, love Jesus. That incredible moment of restoration leads us directly into the first major pillar of Pastor Myers' framework. The absolutely crucial point here is this: living for the resurrected Jesus demands full commitment. And literally everything begins with genuine love. Without this very first step, the rest of the paradigm just doesn't work.
So every time Peter says, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you," Jesus responds with a direct command. He says, "Feed my lambs," or "Tend my sheep." Myers points out something really important here. Jesus doesn't say, "Hey, if you love me, go sit quietly in nature," or "If you love me, just blast some loud worship music in your car." Now, solitary worship is a wonderful thing for sure, but Jesus is making it crystal clear that true, mature love requires active service. It means actively teaching, serving, and caring for Jesus' people. Love isn't just a fleeting feeling here, it is an action verb.
To really cement this idea, Myers uses a fantastic analogy. Think about choosing a godparent for your kids. You would absolutely never walk up to a complete stranger and ask them to raise your children if something terrible happened to you, right? No way! You only entrust your most precious possession, your children, to someone who truly loves them and who loves you. Jesus is about to ascend to heaven. He's leaving his sheep, his people, here on earth. So by telling Peter to feed my sheep, Jesus is basically acting like a parent entrusting his kids to a deeply trusted godparent. Let's move on to part 3. Step 2, glorify Jesus. Once that foundational love is established, the framework moves into deeper and, honestly, much more challenging waters. We're shifting into the second step of the paradigm, glorifying Jesus. And as you'll see, glorifying God often involves some pretty deep personal sacrifice. Jesus gives Peter this really vivid metaphor. He says that when Peter was young, he dressed himself and walked wherever he wanted to go. He had total freedom, kind of like a young adult with 0 responsibilities. But then Jesus warns him that when he grows old, he will stretch out his hands, and someone else will dress him and actually carry him where he does not want to go. It is a really stark contrast between the carefree freedom of youth and the mature, heavy responsibility of Christian submission. As a disciple, you don't just get to do whatever you want anymore. Your whole life is submitted to a higher purpose. But here's the thing. This wasn't just some poetic metaphor about getting older, it was a highly specific prophecy about exactly how Peter would die. Remember, John is writing this gospel around 90 to 95 AD. He already knows how Peter's story ends. Historically, Peter was martyred under the Emperor Nero between 60 and 65 AD, and he was crucified upside down. That is exactly what Jesus meant by stretching out your hands and being led where you do not want to go. Peter, the exact same guy who once completely denied Jesus just to avoid getting hurt, ultimately chose to suffer a horrific death rather than ever deny him again. His ultimate sacrifice glorified God.
And this brilliantly illustrates the whole concept of purposeful sacrifice. Pastor Myers actually references the movie The Return of the King here. Picture Aragorn standing before that hopelessly overwhelming army at the Black Gate of Mordor. He knows for a fact he cannot win this fight, but he charges anyway. Why? Because it's a distraction. He is sacrificing himself and his entire army to buy precious time for Frodo and Sam to destroy the ring. He's fighting not for some worldly victory, but because his sacrifice serves a much grander mission.
Of course, not all suffering is quite that epic or noble, which brings us to a pretty funny story Myers tells about an arrogant young duck hunter and a clever old farmer. So the young hunter shoots a duck, and it lands right on the old farmer's property. They start arguing over who gets to keep it. The old farmer suggests a rule. They each deliver 3 kicks to the other person, and whoever gives up first loses the duck. The young guy confidently agrees. So the old farmer goes first. He delivers 3 absolutely devastating kicks to the young man's stomach and jaw, leaving him just writhing on the ground. The young guy finally struggles to his feet, totally breathless, and says, "All right, old-timer, it's my turn." And the farmer just smiles, says, "Nah, you can keep the duck," and walks away. It's a hilarious story, but the underlying point is incredibly profound. Worldly suffering, like taking 3 kicks to the jaw just out of stubborn pride, is often totally pointless. But when you suffer for a grander purpose, for Jesus, it is never needless. It always has a profound meaning.
All right, that brings us to part 4. Step 3, follow Jesus. Let's bring in the final piece and see how this builds out our complete picture. We've actively loved, we've actively glorified through sacrifice, and now Jesus issues one final, highly active command to Peter. He simply says, "Follow me." Right after Jesus tells Peter how he's going to die, Peter turns around, sees the disciple John, and essentially asks, "Well, hold on, what about him?" Jesus' response to this is incredibly blunt. He basically says, "If I want him to live until I return, what is that to you? You follow me." You know, it is just so easy to compare our lives, our careers, and our struggles to everybody else's. But Myers emphasizes that Jesus is instructing Peter to strictly focus on his own calling. Don't worry about the totally different path laid out for someone else. Your job is simply to put one foot in front of the other and follow the specific path Jesus has mapped out for you. Finally, part 5, the Monday Morning Challenge. So we have this incredible, ancient, biblical framework. But how does any of this actually help us today? We need to transition from all this theological theory into some practical, daily application. Myers challenges his audience to take all of this completely off the pages of Scripture and put it directly onto their Monday morning to-do list. When your alarm goes off tomorrow, don't just mindlessly dive into your routine. Wake up intentional. Pause for a second to listen for direction. Be completely willing to relinquish your own meticulously crafted plans if they happen to get in the way of a higher calling. And most importantly, find a tangible way to serve someone, to feed Jesus' sheep that very day.
The story of Peter isn't just history, guys. It's a blueprint. He failed, he was beautifully restored, and he was given a crystal clear mandate. Love Jesus, glorify him through your choices, and follow your unique path without constantly looking sideways at everyone else. The question really isn't whether this framework is true. The real question is what you are going to do with it tomorrow. So I'm going to leave you with this final thought. When you wake up to the absolute chaos of your regular life, will you choose to feed his sheep on Monday morning? Think about it. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.